Good day to you, fair viewer. Hope you're having a splendid day. It's a shame you clicked on my video because it could possibly become the highlight of your day or fill you up with rage to the point of wishing death upon me. You have been warned. This episode of Doctor Who was written by good old Jamie Matheson, who's down in my books as a bit of an odd one because he wrote my favourite episode of Series 8, Flatline, as well as my least favourite episode of Doctor Who, possibly of all time. The Girl Who Died. Thank God this year the guy could write his script without the looming presence of a man that the BBC could do with less of by this point. Naturally, I was moderately excited, but wasn't expecting much, given the varying quality of his stories as well as the dwindling quality of Series 10 thus far. Will this episode reignite the spark and excitement I felt following episode 2? Let's review what has been laid before us and dwell on whether there is any hope for the rest of the series. The episode begins with one of the most intriguing and beautifully designed sequences the show has ever given us. Firstly, Capaldi's haunting monologue over the images of the spinning yet doomed individuals serves as a fearful reminder of how dangerous the vacuum of space really is. The level of work that went into creating these sequences is incredible, given that I was tricked into thinking Smile would be the glossiest and most visually interesting episode of the series. It kind of reminds me of Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity. Simplistic title, humans in space, and then everything goes terrifically wrong. The interaction with our two characters climbing this rig is a depressing one, given that the woman tries to suggest getting pregnant, and yet he never got the chance to hear her make such a proposition. By looking at her enthusiasm, his lack thereof, and the large amount of space between them, weirdly I was under the impression that he had muted her, which makes their deaths that little bit more interesting. Then there's that beautiful moment where the suits come to kill the two characters. The music stops, shadows start appearing behind the girl, and then silence. It plays on that old "in space nobody can hear you" scream cliche, but it never ceases to amaze me how frightening this idea is and how it's resonated on the screen so well for so many years. Speaking of the music, it is without a doubt eerie, chilling, and fantastically written throughout the episode. In the opening segment, the still music adds another layer of expansiveness to this shot here, and emphasises the horror of when we see all the corpses outside the ship later in the episode. Just as we thought there'd be a break from the horrors of space, the Doctor's lecture this week is about how the vacuum of space will kill you, even if it was meant to be about crop rotation. I think these moments serve as an example of how this incarnation of the Doctor is slowly losing it, but because the show has consistently tried to make him as spontaneous as possible, its effect is fairly minimal. It was really cool how he was slowly making a skull on the blackboard whilst rambling on about all this, just to serve as another warning before we truly get into the meat of the story. Back in the TARDIS, Nardole once again runs his mouth about the bloody vault, needing to be guarded at all times. My patience for this whole thing about the oath and the need for the vault to be guarded is running thinner and thinner as the series goes on, because if they can leave the university willy-nilly, then surely there's nothing to worry about with regards to the strength of those doors. What's worse is that something bad does actually happen at the end of this episode, so the protection of the vault has been compromised as a result of him breaking his own oath. If he breaks it so often, why did he bother having one in the first place? They get into space and I absolutely loved Bill's reaction to the artificial gravity. It's like the Doctor wanted to smash her expectations by doing this. Or perhaps it's just another nod to the series' lack of budget. The huge eyes on the prosthetics of this corpse give it an uncanny feeling, especially given that the individual is dead and all that remains is the intelligence laid within the suit. This idea of oxygen credits is certainly interesting and kept my attention throughout the episode, but didn't seem to have a lot of thought put into it. From the moment the TARDIS begins to create its own air bubble, the station makes us aware that the corporations not only have control over the selling and distribution of oxygen, but also have a patent on it, so breathing air that's not theirs is considered breaking the law. It's cool to think that somehow corporations of the future have a monopoly on the substance that determines our livelihood in the immediate moment. The first problem I have with it, however, is that it's measured in breaths. This is really stupid because you can breathe quickly but get very little oxygen per breath, whereas some are long and contain an awful lot of it. Why they couldn't have just kept showing us the little monitors like a battery being drained instead of all these numbers baffles me. The second problem with this comes from the political aspect, in that the Doctor blames capitalism for the problems of the episode when I would argue it's more bordering corporatism over anything else. So Doctor Who's now unabashedly opposing capitalism, yet still makes millions from the merchandise sold to its fans? Often these days, I just wish the show would go back to being entertaining instead of preaching. I like slapping capitalism as much as the next guy, but you guys have no right to complain about the system that you directly benefit from. Although the idea of suits controlling people sounds like a very Moffat-y idea, the execution is excellent and makes the opposition of this episode very unique, preventing audiences from thinking they're zombies. I really liked how Bill reacted to the body. It kind of reminded me of Donna. Simultaneously, I love how pessimistic Nardole is about this whole affair. He tries inviting the pair back to the TARDIS out of fear, but also to get the Doctor back at the university, giving the Doctor a rebellious dimension to his character. Not that he's ever been given that characteristic before, but it's just interesting to see a companion bring it out of him, instead of it just being something he does of his own volition. It's unfortunate that Nardole lingers along the story with them though, as he begins to grow a little annoying with his comments about the robot voice and when he states the flat out obvious to deliberately infuriate the Doctor and the audience. I will say though, it was nice to see him giving Bill advice on how to breathe instead of seeing the typical distressed character breathing and panicking whilst the rest of the characters try to force her to calm down.
I'll take care of this. Calm down. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
The TARDIS then gets ejected from the station for being too airy, and I think we can safely say that this is one of those stuck on a base episodes with a formula that never fails to impress me. It's something I see complaints about in the comments section of my reviews of episodes like these, but I always find myself enjoying the stories they produce, often because they are so fantastical and creative compared to other episodes. They also bump up the risks to an absurdly high level due to the hostile environment the Doctor and crew have found themselves in, such as being forced to inhabit the suits that have killed the entire crew because it's either that or suffocate. The producers of the show are fully aware of this also.
This is a base under siege story, I guess, as we sort of now call them. So what do you think it is about this that makes it so scary?
I don't know.
I'm surprised, given how self-referential the show has become lately, that they haven't quite parodied the idea yet. I think it's quite brilliant that, given how easy the Doctor's latest adventures have been for him, that he's now receiving the worst luck imaginable. So, his TARDIS is unreachable, his screwdriver's been busted, the oxygen's running low, there's a horde of corpses headed their way, and just to top it all off, they must enter the suits that have killed the crew in order to survive. This small section here left me absolutely breathless, given how the Doctor has now had all his toys taken away from him and is left to the mercy of this unforgiving base.
I tend to try and just take away all the things that help the Doctor. Get rid of the Sonic, get rid of the TARDIS. Yeah. You know, if I can get rid of the psychic paper, I'll do that as well.
The trio then bump into the remainder of the crew, and given how annoying they've been with their usual little race and gender baiting comments, this week's section was actually very humorous. You know what I'm talking about, with Mr. Blue. It's amazing to watch Bill struggle her way through conversation with him, given that she's not only been on the receiving end of racism, but now has found herself being given the title of racist for not being aware of this blue variation of humanity. Perhaps this is a comment on the flippant use of the word racist and how unproductive it is in solving the race relations problem. They even managed to mock the ridiculousness of that stereotypical phrase about having friends of insert minority demographic here in the dialogue. The first forgettable crewmate then gets murdered by the suits. Say, doesn't that look eerily similar to the Cybermen? It would have been better if the suits began uncontrollably thrashing about in an attempt to murder the living, just to make them a bit scarier. The only issue is that the corpse with the massive eyes was pretty scary, but everyone else seems to have just had a bit of makeup slapped on them and were told to walk about like, yep, you guessed it, Cybermen. The helmets were pretty cool, given how they just pop out at the flick of the wrist. I say that, but then fucking Nardole breathes on the inside of his helmet and polishes the outside of it.
What an idiot.
As if the stakes weren't high enough already though, Bill then realises her suit isn't working properly. This prevents her from being able to keep her helmet on and is exposed to the vacuum of space. This segment is a real treat to watch. The long drone of space is heard, the corpse of their crewmates leaning lifelessly into the porthole, the intense close-ups on Bill, and the unimaginably terrifying experience of being left to feel space on her face. This, alongside the slow loss of saturation in the shots that eventually becomes red, just absolutely amazing. Although I would ordinarily complain about the lack of a massive space shootout because of budget, the substitution is absolutely fine by me because it accompanies the moments beforehand so brilliantly. We begin to see the base from Bill's perspective as she passes out to truly reinforce this idea of experiencing the vacuum to us. Then in space, various instances of the battle are shown blurred between reactions from Bill, including more of that rather effective combination of slow motion and motion blur. It's more effective also given that the opening of the episode established what this conflict and horror is like, showing it all over again might have been a little bit overkill. Bill awakens from her experience, followed by possibly the most beautiful moment of the episode. As if our Doctor hadn't been punished enough throughout the episode, he's now been made blind. And my God, I was just in total shock that something like this happened to him. Bill hugs him, and I was genuinely getting a bit flustered about the Doctor being so blind. I haven't felt this emotional watching Who in a long time, and it's very refreshing to have this surge of emotion given how low my expectations for the show have become. Blue Man then gets killed and Bill gets stuck in her suit again. I found it very amusing that Bill couldn't be picked up due to health and safety, despite the one substance that makes people in space healthy and safe is being commodified for a profit. Bill then gets temporarily killed with images of her mother flashing up. Now I'm hoping the relevance of this will be revealed later in the series, but it's left a little open-ended as there's no real connection between these images and her being stuck there. If the Doctor was under some duty of care to make sure this shit doesn't happen to Bill, sure, I get it, but I guess I can't really comment until the series is over. The Doctor then somehow manages to connect the survivors' life signs up to the vital organs of the ship in order to give their lives value, preventing the suits from killing them. There is an unfortunately large amount of waffly dialogue required to explain this before the suits then hand over their oxygen as the only option left to keep the station functioning. Given the show's rather pessimistic view of capitalism, however, I'm surprised at the generosity of the corpses. Does this mean that the corporations have some humanity left in them after all? It makes sense and everything, but it just feels a little flat given how insistent the Doctor is about capitalism being so goddamn evil.
Capitalism, capitalism, capitalism.
It's also hilarious that the show doesn't provide us with any form of alternative, but given the political climate of the present moment, I reckon making the Doctor a socialist would probably make the show lose more popularity than it already has done. The final moments with Nardole and the Doctor though, holy shit! We're once again reminded about the dangers of space travel from Nardole's countless lectures, but then the Doctor states that he's still blind. Who could have seen that coming? I was in shock while simultaneously screaming with joy that for once an episode of Doctor Who ended on a cliffhanger that nobody saw coming. Given the strict formats of the series are often made public before the series is released, I honestly have no idea if another cliffhanger is waiting around the corner. I love it! Bring it on! Oxygen has 6 valence electrons and can bond to hydrogen to form water. God damn it. The Doctor says the phrase, "Death, where is thy sting?" which is a quote from the Bible.
The power of Christ compels you!
The girl who questions the Doctor in his lecture on what exactly he's teaching is Lauren Pate, who is also the assistant director for the series. The opening statement of the episode and the magnetic boots are both references to Star Trek.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
So, did it suck? This is probably the best episode the series has provided us with so far. Although the show's overly direct approach to anti-capitalism sucks, the design was amazing, the music was great, and the stakes were set so goddamn high that I was on the edge of my seat throughout their time in space. The running theme of the Vault and Oaths, as well as improvable enemies, are the only 2 other things I have to complain about, and given the turning of expectations at almost every moment in this episode, and that amazing segment when Bill couldn't put her helmet back on, I certainly did enjoy this episode. I give Oxygen an 8 out of 10. Potential potatoes potentially privocate their prongs.
My binnacle!
It's unfortunate that the helmets were pretty cool, given how they just pop out at the... Fucking hell. This episode of Doctor Who was written by good old Jamie Matheson, who fucking dicks, boy.